Coron has 14 World War II Japanese shipwrecks sitting in waters you can snorkel from the surface, island-hopping tours that cost £17 including lunch, and a 4-day backpacker budget of 7,100 pesos that is roughly £100 total. While Nido charges £35 for the same island tour and calls itself Palawan's crown jewel, Coron delivers the same limestone lagoons, the same turquoise water, and the world's best wreck diving at half the price. But here is the catch. A new airport terminal has just doubled flight capacity. 2 international resort brands are breaking ground right now, and the environmental fee is about to double. So the real question is not whether Coron is worth it today, it's whether the Coron you are imagining will still exist by the time you book.
Welcome to Phil and H Travel. Is it worth it? Today we are in Coron, the northern tip of Palawan in the Philippines, where limestone karst cliffs drop into lagoons, so still they look computer-generated, and Japanese warships from 1944 sit upright on the seabed draped in coral. Coron has always been the quieter, cheaper alternative to El Nido, but in 2026, cheap flights and social media exposure are pulling the curtain back on this place fast. We're going to break down every cost, every logistics trap, every honest disappointment, and every moment that justifies the journey so you can decide, is Coron actually worth it?
You know, you are probably sitting there right now with like 15 different browser tabs open.
Oh, at least 15.
Right. You've got flight aggregators on one screen, Instagram reels of impossibly blue water on another, and you are basically just trying to figure out if you should finally pull the trigger on a ticket to the Philippines.
And honestly, the stakes for this kind of travel are incredibly high. I mean, you are investing your limited annual leave, your hard-earned savings, and, let's be real, enduring a multi-leg exhausting journey across the globe.
Yeah, exactly. And you keep seeing these pristine, glossy images of Coron. But if you look closely at the travel forums right now, there is a very real, very palpable anxiety building. The ground is literally shifting under this island's feet.
It really is. The quiet, rugged frontier is just vanishing. So our mission in this deep dive is to strip away every ounce of that glossy tourism board spin. We want to hand you the raw data.
The actual hard logistics.
Right, the exact peso amounts, the unvarnished reality of what it smells like, feels like, and what it actually costs to stand on that concrete pier in town. We need to figure out if this island is the right fit for you right now before the impending infrastructure boom completely rewrites its DNA forever.
Which is such a massive point because travel is rarely just about stepping into a beautiful photograph, right? It's a mechanical, logistical undertaking.
Oh, 100%. How your time and money translate into a lived experience on the ground is what actually dictates whether a trip is a triumph or just a total disaster.
Yeah, and right now, this specific island is teetering on a really precarious edge. It is halfway between its history as a sleepy, incredibly raw fishing outpost and its future as a highly commercialized, gentrified tourist hub.
So to understand whether it justifies your investment, we really have to start at the absolute foundation. We have to look at what makes this specific patch of ocean geographically and historically distinct from the rest of the planet.
Right, and to do that, we actually have to look beneath the surface of the water. I am so glad we're starting there because whenever I hear people talk about Coron, they immediately mention the shipwrecks. It's always the primary draw.
Always. It's legendary.
But like, as someone who doesn't obsess over maritime history, I
Yeah.
have always wondered, why are there so many ships specifically in this one bay? We are talking about 14 different vessels from the Japanese Imperial Navy, all sitting perfectly preserved underwater.
Right. And they didn't sink over the course of a long campaign either.
Exactly. They all went down on a single day, September 24th, 1944. What exactly happened out there?
Well, to understand that, you have to visualize the geopolitical landscape of late 1944. The American forces were advancing really rapidly across the Pacific, and the Japanese Imperial Navy was just desperately trying to protect its massive supply chain.
And these weren't just like tiny patrol boats.
Right, not at all. We were talking about colossal fleet oilers, heavily armed gunboats, massive seaplane tenders. The Japanese commanders looked at the geography of Coron Bay and thought they had found the perfect natural fortress.
Because of the cliffs?
Exactly. The bay is surrounded by these towering, jagged limestone cliffs. They believed that if they anchored their massive fleet right up against those rocks, the topography itself would shield the ships from American aerial reconnaissance.
So they were basically using the islands as giant rock umbrellas to hide from the planes.
That's exactly it. But the strategy failed catastrophically. The American carrier strike forces, which were moving much faster than the Japanese anticipated, launched a massive, coordinated aerial assault early on the morning of September 24th.
Wow.
It was swift, it was utterly devastating, and within hours, that entire hidden fleet was sent to the bottom of the bay. Fast forward 80 years, and the result of that violent morning is an underwater landscape that is entirely singular.
Because you have this dense concentration of monumental coral-encrusted warships resting in incredibly close proximity to one another.
Exactly. But I know you want to play devil's advocate here.
I do. Because if you talk to the truly hardcore tech diving community,
Yeah.
the guys who wear dry suits and dive with 3 tanks strapped to them.
Right, the serious tech divers.
Yeah, they always point to Truk Lagoon in Micronesia.
Yeah.
They treat Truk Lagoon as the undisputed holy grail of World War II wreck diving. So why should someone fly all the way to Palawan for this?
The answer really comes down to one crucial concept: accessibility. Yes, Truk Lagoon is magnificent, but getting there is an absolute logistical nightmare. You are looking at incredibly complex, multi-day flight routes to Micronesia.
Right, and it's not cheap.
Not at all. Once you finally arrive, you are almost universally required to book a live-aboard dive boat expedition just to access the sites. You are talking about spending upwards of 15,000 pesos, which is hundreds of pounds, just for the baseline access.
And don't you need special certifications for Truk?
You do. Because the ships and trucks sit in very deep water, you generally need advanced technical certifications just to survive the dive safely. But Coron completely shatters that barrier to entry.
That makes so much sense because the sheer proximity of the ships to the town in Coron is what blew my mind. You literally just walk down to the dusty town pier, step onto a traditional wooden banca boat, which, by the way, looks like a canoe with giant bamboo outriggers, and you're hovering directly over a sunken warship in under an hour.
Yeah, you don't need to sleep on a boat for a week.
No. The ships are sitting in just 10 to 35 meters of warm, crystal-clear tropical water.
And the economics of that accessibility are just astonishing. Well, let's look at the actual numbers for a second. A standard 3-dive wreck package in Coron costs approximately 4,000 pesos.
Which equates to roughly 54 British pounds.
Exactly. For 54 pounds, you're getting 3 guided boat dives, swimming through the cargo holds of historically monumental vessels that are now vibrant artificial reefs. That kind of financial value democratizes wreck diving in a way you simply cannot find anywhere else in the global market.
It really does. It's insane. But let's step out of the water for a minute. Let's say you have absolutely zero interest in scuba diving. You are never going to strap a tank to your back. The topside scenery has to justify the flight, right? I know El Nido aggressively markets itself as the crown jewel of the region. Does Coron actually hold up against it?
Geologically speaking, they are practically identical twins. They are both part of the same Palawan UNESCO Heritage Zone. The defining feature of this entire region is karst limestone.
Okay, pause right there, because people throw the word karst around constantly in travel blogs, but what does it actually mean? Like, what am I looking at?
Karst isn't just a shape. It's a very specific geological process. Millions of years ago, this entire area was a vibrant coral reef sitting at the bottom of the ocean. Tectonic shifts violently pushed that reef up out of the sea, exposing it to the air.
Oh.
Right. And over millennia, slightly acidic tropical rainfall has been slowly eating away at that ancient porous limestone. Because the rock dissolves unevenly, the softer parts wash away, leaving behind the hardest, sharpest ridges.
So the result is what you see today.
Exactly. These towering, jagged, blade-like black cliffs that drop completely vertically into the water.
It is wild. It looks so alien, like giant black shards of glass jutting out of the ocean. And tucked inside those limestone shards are the lakes. Cayangan Lake is always the headline, isn't it? Every marketing brochure screams that it is the cleanest lake in the Philippines.
And that claim is actually grounded in reality. The water clarity in Cayangan Lake creates a staggering optical illusion. You can look down from a boat and clearly see the jagged rock formations on the bottom 60 feet down, as if you were looking through polished glass.
But while Cayangan gets the fame, Barracuda Lake is the true geological anomaly.
Oh, absolutely. The thermoclines.
Yes. Trying to explain the feeling of Barracuda Lake to someone who hasn't been there is so difficult. You jump into the water and everything seems normal. You're swimming along, and suddenly your body passes through an invisible threshold.
Yeah, the thermocline. It's the distinct boundary where 2 layers of water with drastically different temperatures just meet. Because Barracuda Lake is a mix of fresh groundwater and seawater, combined with intense geothermal heat radiating from the volcanic rock deep below, the water doesn't mix evenly. It forms intensely stratified layers.
It is the most bizarre sensation. Imagine you are treading water, right? From your waist up, your chest and shoulders are bathed in cool, refreshing 28 degrees Celsius water. But from your waist down, your legs are enveloped in a heavy, thick layer of water that is a sweltering 38 degrees Celsius.
It's so strange.
It feels like you are wading through a bowl of hot soup while a cool breeze hits your neck. You can actually take your scuba mask, look horizontally through the water, and see the heat haze shimmering underwater where those two temperatures violently collide.
It's incredible. And just a short boat ride away, you have Twin Lagoon, which offers a very different kind of sensory magic. It's this massive cavern system where the salt water from the open ocean flows in and meets the freshwater runoff from the cliffs.
Right, and when you swim through that narrow rock entrance into the inner lagoon, the acoustics completely change.
The sound of the ocean just vanishes.
Mhm.
It creates an incredibly still, almost sacred inner basin.
So we have world-class diving for £54, and we have scenery that rivals or exceeds El Nido. Why on earth is it so much cheaper, and why does it feel so much less crowded?
Historically, it really came down to a simple logistical bottleneck.
Yeah.
Currently, Coron still receives roughly 40% fewer international visitors than El Nido.
That's a massive difference.
It is. That massive gap in foot traffic has been the island's protective shield. It kept the local economy grounded, it kept the boat traffic manageable, and it allowed the town to maintain its gritty authenticity. But the data we are seeing right now tells a very clear story. The protective shield is shattering.
Yeah, the expiry date on the quiet version of Coron is arriving incredibly fast.
Because the bottleneck was the airport, right? It was always a hassle to get there.
Yeah.
But that has fundamentally changed. If you look at the infrastructure updates for 2026, Busuanga Airport, which is the gateway to Coron, has just completed a massive terminal expansion.
They are aggressively ramping up capacity. You now have direct Cebu Pacific flights pouring in from Manila, Clark, and Cebu multiple times a day. And the pricing is, honestly, predatory in the best way for consumers. In the shoulder season, you can easily secure a one-way fare for as low as 1,800 pesos. That is about 24 pounds.
Exactly. When you take a secluded island, double its daily flight capacity and drop the entry price to 24 pounds, the economic mathematics shift overnight.
Yeah, it doesn't stay a secret for long.
No. Coron's long-held identity as the sleepy, budget-friendly little sister to El Nido is under immediate severe threat. Two major international resort brands are currently breaking ground on the island, and the local government is already preparing to double the mandatory environmental fees to cope with the influx.
Which means the surge in infrastructure suggests that 2026 might be the absolute final window of opportunity where the financial and logistical reality still works this cleanly in favor of the budget-conscious traveler.
Exactly. Which means, if you are listening to this, the most critical decision you face isn't just deciding to go, it is deciding exactly when you are going to book your ticket.
Right. Because if the window is closing, you want to time your arrival perfectly. But looking at the weather charts for the Philippines is terrifying for a lot of people. It just looks like constant rain. How do you actually parse the calendar?
Well, the biggest mistake travelers make is trying to map the Western four-season calendar onto a tropical archipelago. It just doesn't work. The year in Palawan strictly divides into 3 distinct windows, and you have to approach each one with a clear understanding of the trade-offs involved.
Okay, let's look at the window everyone aims for first. The dry peak season. This is roughly December through May. If you look at the tourism boards, they sell this as absolute paradise.
And visually, it delivers. During those months, the ocean is generally as flat and calm as a swimming pool. If you are diving the wrecks, you are treated to 20 to 30 meters of pristine underwater visibility. The chance of a ruined, rain-soaked day is incredibly low.
But there's a catch.
A big one. Perfection comes at a steep premium, and the island's pricing engine aggressively capitalizes on the demand.
Paint a picture of what that peak pricing actually looks like on the ground.
Let's use the most popular daily activity as a baseline. Tour A. This is the standard group boat tour that takes you to Cayugan Lake, Twin Lagoon, and the Siete Patos Marine Park. If you take that tour in early January, you might pay 1,200 pesos.
Okay.
But as the dry season progresses and domestic tourism surges towards Easter, the operators know they have a captive audience. That exact same boat ride with the exact same lunch quietly jumps to 1,500 pesos.
And beyond the money, it is the sheer density of the crowds that changes the experience. You aren't just paying more, you are fighting for space. You are queuing on the wooden walkways, you are constantly bumping elbows with other snorkelers in the lagoons. It shifts the emotional tone of the landscape from serene to chaotic. Which is why I am curious about the alternative. You have a massive advocate for what you call the sweet spot. Explain why someone should risk traveling in the shoulder months.
The shoulder season, which encompasses June, July, and November, is where the informed traveler wins. Yes, you have to tolerate the word monsoon, but the fear of that word is vastly overstated.
But isn't a monsoon just a wall of unending rain? If I'm spending 24 hours on airplanes, I really don't want to sit in a damp hotel room for a week.
That is the common misconception. During the shoulder season, the rain is largely intermittent. You are highly likely to experience a heavy, dramatic downpour in the late afternoon, which cools the island down beautifully, but the mornings are often bright and clear.
Okay, that sounds manageable.
It is, and the seas remain entirely navigable for the banca boats. Because the massive crowds haven't arrived, the tour operators hold their prices firmly at base rates. Crucially, your largest expense accommodation sees massive discounts. Hotels regularly drop their nightly rates by 20 to 30% compared to the peak dry months.
Okay, I see the financial logic, but what about the main attraction? If someone is flying to Coron specifically to dive the World War II wrecks, doesn't all that rain runoff ruin the water clarity? What is the point of a cheap dive if you can't see the ship?
The visibility absolutely drops. There's no denying that. Instead of 30 meters of crystal clear water, you might be looking at 15 to 20 meters of visibility.
Right. Yeah.
But you have to understand the mechanics of wreck diving. You are not looking for tiny, translucent nudibranch on a pristine coral reef. You are navigating around massive, dark, monolithic steel structures. 15 meters of visibility is more than enough to clearly see the anti-aircraft guns, to navigate the massive blast holes, and to safely penetrate the cargo holds.
That makes sense.
And the slight reduction in water clarity is heavily offset by the fact that you aren't sharing the wreck with 40 other divers kicking silt into your face.
That is a brilliant point. The solitude makes up for the haze. But we have to talk about the final window, which is the wet season gamble, August through October. And I use the word gamble very deliberately. I see budget backpackers looking at the rock-bottom prices during these months and thinking they have found a cheat code.
They haven't found a cheat code. They have found a profound logistical risk. Palawan is fortunate because it sits just south of the main Philippine typhoon belt. It rarely takes a direct catastrophic hit from the super typhoons that batter the northern islands.
It still gets hit.
Exactly. It suffers heavily from the peripheral effects. When a massive storm system passes hundreds of miles to the north, it drags violent winds and massive rolling ocean swells right through Coron Bay.
And the authorities do not mess around with those swells anymore. The Philippine Coast Guard operates with a zero-tolerance policy. If they issue a gale warning, which happens frequently in August and September, they mandate that every single tourist banca boat remains tied to the pier. Period.
No exceptions.
You cannot bribe your way onto the water. The hard data shows that during the peak wet season, boat tours are canceled an average of 2 to 3 days every single week. Furthermore, any tour that requires crossing open ocean, like the trip to the wildlife sanctuary on Calawit or the expedition to Black Island, shuts down completely because the swells make the journey lethally dangerous.
So you have to ask yourself a very harsh question. Is the financial discount actually worth the nightmare of a ruined itinerary? Yes, a budget backpacker can absolutely score a perfectly decent, fan-cooled room in town for 600 pesos a night in August. That is undeniably cheap.
But what is the genuine value of a 600 peso room if you are trapped inside it for 3 days, watching the rain hammer against the glass, entirely unable to access the lakes, the reefs, or the wrecks that you flew across the world to see?
It's the ultimate false economy. You save 20 quid on a room, but you lose the entire purpose of the holiday.
Right. So if you manage to avoid the heavy storms, you still have to navigate the human storms. Let's map out the specific crowd flashpoints for 2026. These are the exact weeks you either need to actively avoid or brace yourself for impact if you have no other choice.
The calendar is punctuated by 3 massive surges. The first is Chinese New Year week, which usually falls in late January or early February. The influx of regional tourists from across Asia is staggering, and hotel inventory vanishes months in advance.
Wow.
The second flashpoint, and arguably the most intense of the entire year, is Semana Santa, or Easter week.
I really don't think people realize how massive Easter is in the Philippines.
It is the single largest domestic travel period of the year. The Philippines is a deeply Catholic country, and that entire week is treated as a national holiday. Millions of Filipinos leave the cities and head for the beaches, and Coron is considered a premium domestic target. The town infrastructure just buckles under the weight of the domestic crowds.
And there is a third, newer wave that we are actively tracking for 2026, the month of November. It used to be a quiet shoulder month, but the European digital nomads have figured out the math.
Oh, they definitely have.
They are escaping the miserable incoming European winter. They are chasing the post-monsoon accommodation deals, and they are flooding the hostels. November is simply no longer the quiet secret it was 5 years ago.
But regardless of which month you choose, there is one daily, unavoidable logistical trap that every single traveler must navigate, and that is the Cayangan Lake bottleneck.
Please pay close attention to this because this is the ultimate hack for preserving your sanity in Coron. Do not go to Cayangan Lake between 10 o'clock in the morning and 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Just refuse to do it.
The reasoning is entirely structural. Every single group tour operator in town follows the exact same rigid itinerary. They load the boats at 9, they hit a snorkel spot, and they all funnel their guests into Cayangan Lake at exactly the same time. The infrastructure cannot handle it.
It really can't.
The lake is accessed via a narrow, steep wooden staircase built into the cliff. Between 10 and 1, that staircase turns into a suffocating 200-person traffic jam. When you finally get over the ridge and into the water, you are surrounded by a cacophony of shouting tourists bobbing around in bright orange life jackets. It completely destroys the serenity of the environment.
So how do you actually bypass it? Because I absolutely hate the idea of being jammed onto a wooden staircase with hundreds of people fighting for a selfie.
You had to deliberately disrupt the standard schedule. You essentially have two options. The first is to hire a private boat, sit down with your captain before you leave the pier, and explicitly demand that Cayangan Lake is your very first stop. You want to be on the water at 7:30 in the morning, arriving at the lake before the massive group tours have even finished loading their coolers onto their boats back in town.
That's a great idea. And the second option?
Your second option is to completely invert the itinerary. Tell your captain you want to arrive at Cayangan after 3 o'clock in the afternoon when the massive flotilla of group tours has already moved on to their final afternoon snorkeling spots.
Right.
Experiencing that lake in total, echoing silence, versus experiencing it with 200 thrashing tourists is the difference between forming a lifelong core memory and enduring a deeply frustrating tourist trap.
All right, so you have picked your dates carefully, you have your itinerary strategy locked in. Let's talk about the reality of the ground. Let's mentally walk through the exact sensory experience of landing and arriving. Because the moment you step off that plane, the vibe of Palawan hits you instantly. Let's imagine you've booked your flights for November. You land at Francisco B. Reyes Airport. What exactly happens next?
Well, you fly in on a prop plane from Manila, which takes about an hour. And depending on your timing, that ticket costs you anywhere from 1,800 to 4,500 pesos. The moment the cabin doors open and you step onto the tarmac, the heat hits you.
Like a wall.
It really is. It is a dense, humid, physical weight that instantly clings to your clothes. But the airport experience has vastly improved. They finally finished the new terminal building, which means you are walking into functioning air conditioning, rather than the old tin roof oven they used to operate out of.
And more importantly than the air conditioning, there is a very specific machine sitting in that arrivals hall that you absolutely need to visit.
Yes. The new terminal features a functioning BPI ATM right near the exit.
Which is huge.
Massive. BPI stands for the Bank of the Philippine Islands. It is one of the largest, most reliable national banks in the country. This is a huge logistical upgrade because Coron is still overwhelmingly a cash-based economy. Small vendors, tricycle drivers, and the local eateries do not take Apple Pay or credit cards. Having a reliable high withdrawal limit ATM the moment you land solves a massive headache.
So you have a stack of pesos in your wallet. Now you have to traverse the island to get to the actual town. You walk out the front doors, and you have a choice to make. You can jump into a shared commuter van, which will cost you a flat, highly regulated rate of 150 to 200 pesos per person. Or, if you want immediate comfort, you can hire a private van for your group, which will run you between 800 and 1,200 pesos.
Whichever option you choose, you are settling in for a 30 to 40-minute drive across Busuanga Island. And this drive is Often a huge visual shock for first-time visitors.
Yeah, because they expect something else.
Right, you arrive expecting lush, dripping tropical rainforests everywhere. But the interior of Busuanga is largely vast stretches of dry, rolling tropical scrubland. It is dusty, agricultural, and punctuated by small farming outposts. It feels rugged, almost arid in certain months.
You are sitting in the van looking at this dry brush, wondering if you made a huge mistake. But then the road winds up a steep incline, the van crests a specific hill, the scrubland suddenly falls away, and you get that first impossible panoramic reveal of Coron Bay.
It's breathtaking.
It is staggering. You are looking down at this vast, perfectly flat mirror of teal water, punctuated by these massive, jagged, black limestone towers rising vertically out of the sea. It is a cinematic, deeply emotional reveal.
But the moment the van descends from that hill and drops you into the narrow streets of Coron Town, the sensory details shift violently. The visual majesty of the bay is instantly replaced by the raw, chaotic reality of a working Philippine municipality.
Smells, the sounds.
Exactly. The air is thick. It smells intensely of clean, sharp sea salt from the harbor, instantly mixed with a heavy, rich, savory scent of charcoal smoke billowing from the roadside chicken grills. You hear the constant, high-pitched mechanical whine of hundreds of motorized tricycles navigating the tight streets.
And this is where I think people really struggle to adjust. When I first walked down the National Highway, which is just a two-lane road acting as the main artery of the town, I was shocked by the aesthetic. It is not a manicured resort village. It feels like a place that is violently struggling with its own identity.
Yeah, the contrast is stark.
You have this massive, brightly lit, modern 7-Eleven that just arrived in 2024, glowing with neon lights and blasting air conditioning. And literally right next door, sharing a wall, is a humble, corrugated iron stall where a local woman is selling an 80 peso plate of home-cooked pork adobo out of metal pots. It feels like a chaotic pricing engine where the authentic, gritty old world and the slick new tourist economy are violently colliding on every single street corner.
I completely understand why that collision is jarring, but I actually interpret that lack of curation as Coron's greatest strength.
Really? How so?
Well, I genuinely love that there is no pretentious resort gate. There is no manicured, cobblestone, Instagram-ready entrance to the town designed purely to extract dollars from foreigners. It forces you, as a visitor, to engage with the reality of life in the Philippines. It is a working fishing town with a booming tourism economy awkwardly bolted onto it. It is not a fake, sterilized village built exclusively for your comfort. That kind of unvarnished authenticity is increasingly rare in Southeast Asia.
That is a fair point. It demands that you engage with it on its own terms.
Yep.
And you cannot argue with the raw scale of the landscape that looms directly over the town. Within your first 24 hours, you will look up from the street and see the giant cross on the hill.
Mount Tapias.
Yes, and inevitably, you will decide to climb the 724 concrete steps of Mount Tapias. You drag yourself up there in the late afternoon heat. Your calves are absolutely burning. You are drenched in sweat. But then you reach the summit viewing deck, and you watch the sunset ignite the sky over the bay, turning the water into these impossible shades of gold and violet. And the best part, it doesn't cost a single peso. It grounds you in the sheer scale of the environment you are about to explore.
But after the sun goes down, you have to sleep somewhere. And navigating the accommodation landscape here requires a very clear understanding of the geography and the deeply stratified economics of the island.
Right, let's look at the map. There are essentially three distinct accommodation zones. First, you have Coron Town itself. This is highly walkable. It is where the cheapest options are concentrated, and it is where all the tour boats depart from. But it is undeniably noisy. You will hear tricycles buzzing at all hours, and roosters will absolutely start crowing at 4 in the morning.
They definitely will.
Second, you have the outskirts areas like Decabobo. The resorts out there have much more physical space and tranquility, but you are entirely reliant on a motorized tricycle ride every time you want to buy a bottle of water or get to the pier. And third, you have the remote islands. These are premium, isolated, private environments that you can only reach by boat.
Let's put exact current numbers to these tiers so you know exactly what you're paying for. Let's start with the budget backpacker. If your primary goal is maximizing the lifespan of your travel budget, you are looking at properties like Hop Hostel or the Discovery Hostel. Both are situated right on the main strip in town. You are paying somewhere between 500 and 800 pesos, which equates to roughly 7 to 11 British pounds for a single bed in a shared dorm room.
And I want to be very clear about what 7 pounds buys you, because people hear the word hostel and picture a grim, sweaty room with no fans. That is not the case here. These are highly modern, purpose-built setups. For that 7 pounds, you are getting blast chiller air conditioning, thick privacy curtains on your bunk, personal reading lights, and immaculately clean communal bathrooms. Hop Hostel, specifically, has this incredible rooftop bar and social area that looks out over the bay. The catch, however, is inventory. Because the value is so high, properties at that price point book out 2 to 3 weeks in advance during the dry season. You absolutely cannot just show up at the ferry terminal with your backpack and expect to find a bed.
Now, if we move up a bracket to the mid-range couple tier, the decisions become much more complicated. This is where you actually have options, and frankly, this is where we fundamentally disagree on the best strategy for the traveler.
They disagree entirely on this.
We are looking at a budget of roughly 2,200 to 3,500 pesos a night.
Right. And if you are a couple spending that kind of money, which is roughly 34 to 47 pounds, my absolute undeniable pick is the Coron Underwater Garden Resort. It runs right in that sweet spot of 2,500 to 3,500 pesos. You get a comfortable sea view double room, you have access to a pool, and a basic breakfast is included. But the absolute clincher for me is the fully integrated in-house dive center.
I know exactly why you love it, but explain the logistics to someone who hasn't dived there before.
Well, if you are coming to Coron to dive the shipwrecks, the morning logistics can be brutal. If you stay in a standard hotel, you wake up, hail a tricycle, drag your heavy dry bags across town, find your dive shop, get fitted, and then walk to the pier. At Underwater Garden, the dive shop is part of the resort. You roll out of bed, eat your eggs and rice, walk 20 feet down the dock, and step directly onto the dive boat. The efficiency and the lack of morning stress are worth their weight in gold.
I completely understand the efficiency argument. I really do. But you have to consider the physical toll of this environment. I champion the Coron Soleil Garden Resort, which sits in a slightly cheaper bracket of 2,200 to 3,000 pesos. Yes, it is located on the outskirts of town, which means it requires a mildly annoying 5-minute tricycle ride to get to the pier every morning. You lose that immediate boat access.
So why advocate for the daily tricycle commute?
Because what you gain in exchange is vital for your physical recovery. Soleil Garden offers a remarkably quieter setting, far removed from the constant harbor noise and the exhaust fumes of the national highway. The rooms are newer, the pool is vastly superior for relaxing, and crucially, they invest in vastly better mattresses.
You are so hung up on the mattresses. Is it really that big of a deal?
It is a massive deal. You have to visualize your day. You are spending 8 hours sitting on a vibrating wooden boat bench. You are climbing up and down steep wooden ladders with heavy scuba gear. You are swimming for miles, fighting tidal currents around jagged shipwrecks. By 5 o'clock, your body is profoundly exhausted.
Okay, fair.
The standard budget mattress in the Philippines can be incredibly unforgiving. They are often thin, and you can literally feel the metal springs digging into your ribs. Soleil Garden understands sleep quality. Having a plush, supportive bed to recover in is absolutely worth handing a tricycle driver 20 pesos in the morning.
Okay, I concede that fighting a current all day and coming home to a terrible bed is miserable. But what if you aren't a couple? What if you're traveling with children? The dynamic changes entirely when you add a family to the mix. The gritty town suddenly looks a lot less appealing.
For families, the clear, undeniable winner is Coron West Town Resort. You are looking at a budget of 4,000 to 6,000 pesos a night, which is roughly 54 to 81 pounds. For that price, you get a proper, spacious family suite with multiple beds. But more importantly, it is the only property near the town that provides a genuine resort-style infrastructure.
Why is that infrastructure so necessary for kids? Why not just stay in town?
Because the town lacks public spaces for children. There are no safe sidewalks to push a stroller, and there are no public parks. West Town solves this by offering a massive, multi-tiered swimming pool, a dedicated, safe restaurant environment, guaranteed reliable hot water, which is not a given in Coron, and they bundle family-friendly island tour packages directly from the front desk. When you are managing the moods and energy levels of young children in a humid environment, you absolutely need that all-in-one, frictionless infrastructure.
That makes total sense.
And finally, we have to look at the luxury tier. This is where the numbers get steep on paper, but the actual value proposition is phenomenal when you compare it to the rest of the globe. In town, you have the Two Seasons Coron Bayside Hotel, which runs between 8,000 and 14,000 pesos a night. But if you want the true high-end isolated experience, you look at Club Paradise Palawan, located on Damacia Island. Club Paradise is a fully private island resort. It is remote. It requires a 40-minute private speedboat transfer from the mainland just to reach the arrival dock. The pricing is aggressive. It costs between 15,000 and 25,000 pesos a night. That is 203 to 340 British pounds per night.
Which sounds like an absolute fortune for Southeast Asia until you contextualize what you are actually buying.
Exactly. What Club Paradise delivers is an aesthetic and service level that directly competes with the ultra-luxury resorts in the Maldives or Bora Bora. You're getting the exact same crystalline water clarity, your own private protected house reef teeming with turtles, and that iconic secluded overwater aesthetic. But you're paying a quarter of what you would pay for an equivalent property in the Indian Ocean. It is world-class luxury offered at a massive global discount.
So once you have secured your bed, whether it is a 7-pound bunk in a lively hostel or a 300-pound villa on a private island, you still have to navigate the daily reality of keeping yourself fed. And the food scene in Coron is absolutely fascinating because it starkly highlights the economic and cultural divide between the local way of life and the imported tourist infrastructure.
It is a profound dual economy. If you want to actually understand Coron and if you want to protect your budget, you have to step away from the neon signs of the tourist restaurants and engage with the local side of the culinary divide first. This entirely revolves around the carinderias, the traditional open-air, tray-service eateries heavily concentrated near the public market area.
This is where you find the staggering everyday value. A full, incredibly filling meal at a carinderia will cost you between 60 and 100 pesos. That is 80 pence to £1.35.
And you are not sacrificing quality for that price. You are eating the soul of the culture. The food is incredibly rich and deeply flavorful. You walk up, point to the metal trays, and they serve you a generous mountain of white rice accompanied by a viand.
Let's explain that word, because viand is a term you see on every menu in the Philippines, but it confuses a lot of Westerners. What is a viand?
In the Philippine culinary context, meals are entirely anchored by rice. The rice is the canvas. The viand is essentially the main dish, the intensely flavored meat, fish, or vegetable stew that exists specifically to be mixed with and cut by that mountain of rice. You are meant to eat these dishes on their own. Their strong flavors are designed to soak into the bland grains.
And the flavors of those viands are incredible. You will find classic pork adobo, where chunks of pork belly are slowly braised in soy sauce, cane vinegar, bay leaves, and crushed garlic until the fat is meltingly tender. You will see chicken inasal, which is chicken heavily marinated in lemongrass, calamansi lime, and annatto oil, then blistered over hot charcoal. And my personal favorite, sinigang. It is a profoundly sour, savory soup made with a tamarind broth that cuts right through the oppressive tropical heat.
But if you want the ultimate local dining experience, the absolute pinnacle of eating in Coron, you must participate in the paluto experience. This is not just a meal. It is a full interactive event. It begins at the Coron Public Market.
Describe the wet market because it is an assault on the senses.
It is loud. It is chaotic. The concrete floors are constantly wet with melting ice and seawater, and the smell of the raw ocean is overwhelming. You walk past rows of wooden tables, and you buy your seafood raw directly from the fisherman who caught it hours earlier. You can haggle for a kilo of massive, wildly colorful live prawns for 400 to 500 pesos, or you can pick out a beautiful whole lapu-lapu, a premium local grouper for 350 to 450 pesos. You are literally watching them pull the fish from the aerated water tanks.
Okay, so I am standing in a wet market holding a plastic bag full of raw prawns. I don't have a kitchen in my hotel. What do I do?
You take your bag of raw seafood to the adjacent paluto stalls located just behind the market. The word paluto literally translates to have cooked. You hand the cooks your catch, and for a very modest cooking fee of 100 to 200 pesos, they will prepare it exactly to your specifications. They will steam the grouper with fresh ginger and soy sauce. They will grill the massive prawns in excessive amounts of garlic butter, or fry them up in a sticky, sweet, and sour sauce.
The economics of this are absurd. 2 people can sit down at a plastic table to a massive indulgent feast of ultra-fresh premium seafood, accompanied by unlimited rice and ice-cold local drinks for a grand total of 700 to 900 pesos. That is roughly 9 to 12 British pounds for a meal that would easily cost over 100 pounds in London or New York. Plus, you get the deeply theatrical, visceral experience of navigating the wet market.
However, we have to acknowledge the other side of the culinary divide. The tourist strip.
Hmm.
These are places like La Sireneta, Brujita, or Lolo Nonois. These establishments are specifically designed to cater to Western palates. They offer pizzas, thick beef burgers, imported pastas, and heavily toned down, less adventurous versions of local dishes.
And the prices rigidly reflect that catering. Main courses at these tourist spots run from 250 to 450 pesos. Now, to be entirely fair, that is still exceptionally cheap by Westgate standards, maybe 4 to 6 pounds a plate. But you have to realize it is 3 to 4 times the cost of the authentic local carinderias sitting just 2 streets away.
It is also vital to ground your logistical planning with everyday grocery costs, because those little purchases impact your daily budget significantly over a 2-week trip. The anchor for grocery pricing is the massive Save More supermarket located in the center of Coron Town.
Let's run the exact numbers so you know precisely what to expect when you walk the aisles. A standard liter of bottled water is 25 pesos. A local beer, specifically the ubiquitous San Miguel Pale Pilsen, is 45 to 65 pesos if you buy it cold in the supermarket. But be aware that exact same bottle jumps to 80 to 120 pesos the second you order it in a bar overlooking the water. A standard loaf of sliced white bread is 55 pesos. A single sachet of instant 3-in-1 coffee is 8 pesos.
Only 8 pesos.
Yeah, exactly. It's just pennies.
But here is the critical warning regarding groceries. Anything imported carries a massive, punishing premium. If you suddenly crave imported sharp cheddar cheese, foreign breakfast cereals, or specific Western snack brands like Doritos, expect to pay 2 to 3 times what you would pay back home. Every single item in that supermarket has to be loaded onto a cargo ferry in Manila and shipped to the island, and the heavy logistical costs of that sea freight are passed directly to you at the checkout counter.
Which is exactly why you should lean heavily into the local way of living and eating. And that local integration extends beyond just what you eat to exactly how you eat and interact with the people serving you. We need to talk about etiquette because displaying a little bit of cultural awareness here fundamentally transforms your entire social experience. I noticed on my first day that almost nobody uses knives. Everyone uses a spoon and a fork. Why is that?
The mechanics of eating in the Philippines are highly specific. Filipinos use a fork and a spoon, but the hierarchy of the utensils is completely reversed compared to Western dining. The spoon is the primary tool. You hold the spoon in your dominant hand, and you use the fork in your offhand purely as an assistant tool. The fork's only job is to push the food, the mound of rice, the tender meat, the rich sauce onto the spoon, which then goes into your mouth.
It makes complete sense once you understand the cuisine. If you are eating sinigang, a fork is practically useless for scooping up the tamarind broth and the rice simultaneously. But beyond table manners, there is a linguistic key that unlocks a completely different level of warmth and hospitality from the locals, and that is the word po.
P.O. Right. Po is an honorific particle added to the end of sentences to signal deep structural respect. Historically, it is used primarily when addressing elders, but in modern daily life, it is heavily used when speaking to service staff, tricycle drivers, boat captains, and guides.
You will hear the phrase salamat po, which simply means thank you with respect constantly throughout your day. And the golden rule of visiting Coron is simple. Use it back. When you hand the cashier 25 pesos for that bottle of water, say salamat po. When you step out of the tricycle and hand the driver his coins, say salamat po. It costs you absolutely nothing. It requires zero linguistic skill, but the psychological effect is profound. The moment a local resident hears a foreigner make the tiny effort to use po, their entire demeanor softens. They smile wider. It instantly elevates you from being just another demanding walking wallet on holiday to a guest who genuinely respects their home.
So we have covered the slights, the weather windows, the room rates, and the food costs. It is time to synthesize everything into hard bottom-line mathematics. What does a day actually cost? What is the real, out-of-pocket daily budget for a traveler in Coron in 2026?
I want to visualize exactly what a day looks like for different budgets, rather than just reading a list of numbers. Let's paint a picture of 4 distinct travel styles, starting with the low-budget backpacker.
For the disciplined backpacker, the daily target is 1,800 pesos, which is roughly 24 British pounds.
Imagine your day on 24 pounds. You wake up in a crisp, air-conditioned bunk at Hop Hostel. That is 700 pesos. You walk outside into the morning heat, hand a tricycle driver 100 pesos to ferry you around town. You aren't eating imported granola. You are sitting at a carinderia, spending 400 pesos total for the day on rich pork adobo, rice, and fresh fruit from the market. For activities, you allocate 500 pesos. Now, a boat tour costs more than that, but this is a daily average. It assumes you pay for a group tour one day, and the next day you simply hike Mount Tapias and swim at the public beaches for free. Finally, you have 100 pesos left over for miscellaneous joys, like a cold San Miguel beer from the Save More while watching the sunset. 24 pounds a day to live in a tropical archipelago with world-class diving. It is staggering.
But let's look at the mid-range couple. We calculate this strictly per person to keep the math standard. The daily total here is 3,700 pesos, or 50 pounds per person.
Picture a 50-pound day. You wake up in a plush bed at the Sole Garden Resort. Your share of the room is 1,500 pesos. You have an 800 peso daily food budget, which is incredibly freeing. It allows you to mix the visceral, chaotic, paluto wet market feast at lunch with a refined, relaxed dinner at a tourist spot like Brujita in the evening. You have 200 pesos for transport, easily covering tricycles and shared van transfers. Crucially, you allocate 1,000 pesos daily for activities. This easily covers booking premium full-day island-hopping group tours with a massive buffet lunch included every single day. And you have 200 pesos for miscellaneous coffees and tips. 50 pounds a day for a deeply comfortable, activity-rich holiday without constantly checking your bank balance.
Now let's examine the high-budget luxury traveler, also calculated per person. The daily total jumps massively to 13,000 pesos, or 176 pounds a day.
The jump is entirely driven by exclusivity. You are allocating 7,000 pesos per person to split a premium villa at a private island like Club Paradise. Your food budget is 2,000 pesos, meaning you are eating strictly resort dining and lavish prepared seafood spreads. 500 pesos goes to private, air-conditioned van transfer so you never have to smell tricycle exhaust. 3,000 pesos is dedicated to activities. This covers chartering private bancas so you never share a boat, and paying for advanced technical wreck diving packages. And 500 pesos covers miscellaneous high-end cocktails and generous tips.
And finally, we must address a category that is rapidly altering the local economy: the digital nomad looking to stay for a full month. We calculate a monthly total of 50,000 to 60,000 pesos, which is roughly 675 to 810 pounds.
The bulk of that goes to rent. A monthly lease for a basic air-conditioned studio apartment in town will run 25,000 to 35,000 pesos. You allocate about 15,000 pesos for local food and daily living. But the critical structural data point here is the infrastructure. Dedicated co-working spaces with ergonomic chairs are highly limited. You will mostly be working hunched over a laptop at cafes or in your hostel common area. And the Wi-Fi. We have to be brutally honest about the speeds.
You are looking at 15 to 50 megabits per second on a good, clear day. And if a strong storm system rolls through, that fragile connection drops entirely, sometimes for hours.
But regardless of which tier you fall into, there is a massive analytical takeaway that makes all of these budgets so compelling. If you compare Coron to El Nido, the math is undeniable. An equivalent mid-range daily budget in El Nido runs between 5,500 and 6,500 pesos per person. Coron delivers the exact same staggering Palawan geological experience, plus the bonus of world-class wrecks for a massive 30 to 40% discount.
That 30 to 40% savings is the core reason people flock here. But, and this is a monumental but, that beautiful math only holds up if you don't fall victim to the island's perfectly engineered, manufactured tourist funnels. There are people who arrive in Coron with a strict budget and immediately bleed money because they step right into these traps on day one. We need to explicitly name and dismantle the three biggest logistics traps on the island.
Trap number 1. The Busuanga Airport Van Hustle. I have watched this happen to so many tired travelers. It is a classic psychological pinch point. You have just landed. You are exhausted from the flight. The tropical heat hits you like a hammer, and you walk bleary-eyed into the arrivals area. Immediately, aggressive van drivers approach you with laminated, official-looking cards quoting inflated private transfer rates of 500 to 800 pesos per person to get to town.
The psychology they use relies on the illusion of scarcity. The way they present their laminated cards heavily implies that this expensive private van is the only available method to leave the airport. They prey on the fact that you don't know the layout yet.
And the reality is that confused, exhausted first-timers, desperate to just get to their hotel, hand over 1,600 pesos for 2 seats in a van that actually holds 8 people anyway. The fix for this is incredibly simple, but you have to walk with confidence. When you exit the doors, ignore the touts with the laminated cards, keep walking exactly 20 meters further out into the parking lot, and you will see a clearly marked, highly regulated, shared van stand. The flat, government-approved rate to Coron Town is 150 to 200 pesos per person. Or, better yet, simply email your hostel 3 days before you land and pre-book the shared van for a flat 150 pesos.
Trap number 2, the exclusive private tour markup. Walk down the national highway on your first evening, and dozens of tour agency operators will aggressively try to push you toward booking a private tour, costing anywhere from 5,000 to 8,000 pesos for the day. They use language specifically designed to trigger FOMO, the fear of missing out. They will point to the standard group tours and call them cattle runs, promising you a tailored, exclusive, luxurious experience if you pay the premium.
Let's unpack the reality of that supposed exclusivity. The private tours go to the exact same sites, Cayugan Lake, Twin Lagoons, Sia Pecados, as the cheap group tours. They absolutely have to, because the Coast Guard and the local maritime authorities strictly regulate the boat routes. You will arrive at the exact same wooden walkways, you will look at the exact same viewpoints, and you will swim in the exact same water. The only tangible difference is that you are sitting on a slightly smaller banca boat with a dedicated crew, which is undeniably pleasant, but you have to ask yourself, is sitting on a smaller piece of wood really worth an extra 6,000 pesos?
For 90% of travelers on a budget, the answer is no. A standard, well-run group tour costs between 1,200 and 1,700 pesos. That price comprehensively includes your buffet lunch, your mandatory entrance fees to the indigenous ancestral domains, your snorkel gear, and a tricycle pickup from your hotel.
But I absolutely hate the idea of being jammed onto a boat with 20 strangers wearing neon life jackets fighting for space on the bench. But I also look at my spreadsheet and know I cannot justify spending 8,000 pesos to charter a private boat just for myself. What do you do if you were stuck in that miserable middle ground?
This is where you execute what is locally known as the joiner's hack. You don't book with the hawkers on the street. You go to the front desk of a busy, highly social property like Hop Hostel. You tell the receptionist you want to organize a joiners group of 4 to 6 people for a private boat tomorrow. The hostel staff will easily find 3 other travelers who want the exact same thing. You charter the private boat for 5,000 pesos, but because you split it 5 ways, you are only paying 1,000 pesos each. It is the absolute perfect sweet spot. You avoid the massive 20-person crowds, you dictate the schedule to avoid the Cayugan bottleneck, and you keep your strict daily budget entirely intact.
That is brilliant. Okay, trap number 3. This one infuriates me because it preys on people's dreams, and it specifically targets the diving community. The dive shop beginner package walk-in. Imagine you arrive in Coron. You aren't a certified scuba diver, but you have seen the photos and you know you desperately want to see the World War II ships. You walk into a brightly lit dive shop on the main road, and the salesperson immediately pivots to selling you a Discover Scuba introductory package bundled with 3 exclusive wreck dives for an eye-watering 12,000 to 15,000 pesos. The heavy implication from the salesperson is that you absolutely must buy this expensive, heavy air tank program to actually see the wrecks.
Which requires a massive, urgent reality check. You do absolutely not need a scuba tank, a regulator, or a heavyweight belt to see several of these magnificent wrecks. Take the Luzon gunboat, for example. It sank at a steep angle, and its stern is currently resting in just 3 to 5 meters of water. You can literally float peacefully on the surface with a cheap plastic snorkel, look straight down, and perfectly see the hull, the deck, and the coral growth of a Japanese warship. Skeleton Wreck is similarly accessible. The bow is practically touching the surface. Both of these sites are entirely free to view on standard cheap 1,000 peso group boat tours.
Exactly. If you are not a certified diver, do not let anyone shame, pressure, or upsell you into a 15,000 peso scuba package just to look at metal underwater. Book the standard snorkeling tour. Now, if you're a fully certified diver, you still have to navigate the pricing traps. Do not book massive multi-day dive packages online weeks before you arrive. The shops operating the slickest websites rely entirely on you not knowing the actual ground rates in town.
We are going to explicitly name-drop the honest shops right now so you know who to trust. Coron Divers, Pirates Diving, and D-Divers. These operators respect the local market and they respect the diver. They charge a fair, highly competitive rate of 4,000 to 5,500 pesos for a full 3-dive day for certified divers. The strategy is simple. Always bring your physical PAGI or SSI certification card and your stamped logbook, walk through their front door in person, and ask for the walk-in rate.
So we have successfully navigated the financial spreadsheets and the logistical traps. But beyond the math, we have to talk about the physical reality of the environment, because a cheap holiday isn't worth it if you end up in the hospital. What is the reality of physical safety and comfort across different demographics? Is it actually safe to walk around this gritty town?
Let's immediately dismiss the specter of violent crime. Coron is fundamentally one of the safest destinations in all of Southeast Asia. Violent crime directed against tourists is virtually non-existent. You are not going to get mugged walking back to your hotel. The true, severe risks on this island are entirely environmental, not criminal.
The risk hierarchy is very clear, and number one, by a massive, undeniable margin, is the sun, sunburn, and severe dehydration. We are talking about a tropical UV index that routinely hits level 11 or higher, and the physical reality of these island hopping tours is that you are spending 5 to 7 hours sitting on a wooden bank of boat that often provides absolutely zero meaningful shade while being entirely surrounded by highly reflective, blinding water.
Sun poisoning will violently ruin your trip faster than a bad plate of seafood. You have to treat the Palawan sun with absolute military respect. Long-sleeve rash guards are vastly superior to constantly reapplying chemical sunscreens. The second major environmental risk is jellyfish stings. This is highly seasonal, primarily becoming an issue from June through October. You must carry a small plastic bottle of household white vinegar in your waterproof dry bag at all times. The boat crews usually know this and carry their own, but having your own supply immediately accessible is crucial for instantly neutralizing the sting.
Then you have the mechanical and infrastructural risks. Seasickness is incredibly common on the choppy bank of crossings when the afternoon wind picks up. But on land, the primary cause of injury, the thing that fills the local clinic, is unpaved motorbike accidents. Tourists rent cheap scooters in town, assuming the roads leading out to the remote beaches are smoothly paved just like the national highway. They aren't. They rapidly devolve into deep gravel, loose sand, and massive potholes. Inexperienced riders wash out, tear up their legs, and ruin their holiday.
Let's do a demographic deep dive regarding safety and comfort. Let's look specifically at the solo female traveler.
The assessment from the data for solo female travelers is overwhelmingly highly positive. The underlying Filipino culture is incredibly warm, deeply family-oriented, and largely non-threatening. Solo women consistently report feeling entirely secure walking down the national highway in Coron Town late at night.
Furthermore, the social infrastructure supports solo travel perfectly. Hostels like Hop Hostel operate as natural, fictionless community hubs. It is effortless to find dinner companions or, as we discussed, people to split that joiner's private boat tour with. There is only one specific minor caution we note from the ethnographic data. Occasionally, young boat tour guides can become overly familiar or flirty with solo female guests during the long days on the water.
How should someone handle that if they are stuck on a boat with them all day?
The solution is incredibly straightforward. Establish firm, polite boundaries immediately. Philippine culture is highly non-confrontational and relies heavily on saving face. Therefore, a clear, direct, but polite boundary usually resolves the behavior instantly without escalating any tension or ruining the vibe of the tour.
Now, what about families? Because looking at the photos, a tropical island sounds like the ultimate playground for kids. But the logistics of getting to those playgrounds look exhausting.
Families face significant structural challenges in Coron, particularly with children under the age of 6. You have to visualize the unvarnished reality of the day tours. You are asking a toddler to sit on a loud, violently vibrating wooden boat, inhaling diesel fumes for 3 to 5 hours a day. When you finally arrive at the pristine islands, there are generally no changing rooms, no proper toilet facilities, and absolutely nowhere comfortable for a child to nap out of the sun.
And the water itself isn't always a calm, shallow wading pool. Sites like Siete Pecados have notoriously strong, unpredictable tidal currents. Managing a panicked 4-year-old in a bulky life jacket while fighting a sweeping current is physically exhausting, not relaxing.
Therefore, the hard recommendation is that Coron works best for families with children aged 6 and older, kids who have the physical stamina and swimming ability for the raw environment. If you do bring a family, as we mentioned, West Town Resort is your absolute sanctuary. But there is one bizarre yet undeniably wonderful excursion you must do if you have kids: the Callaway Safari Tour.
Oh, this is fascinating. Please explain the history of Callaway, because seeing a giraffe on a tropical Philippine island breaks my brain.
It is one of the strangest historical anomalies in the country. Back in the 1970s, the dictator Ferdinand Marcos decided he wanted a piece of Africa in the Philippines. The official, heavily publicized story was that he was providing a vital sanctuary for endangered animals threatened by conflict and poaching in Kenya. The unofficial, much darker reality is that local indigenous families were aggressively cleared off the island to make way for a dictator's private, bizarre, vanity safari park. They literally shipped over giraffes, zebras, and various antelopes by boat. 50 years later, the Marcos regime of that era is gone, but the descendants of those African animals are still there, roaming freely. It operates today as a wildlife sanctuary. It costs about 1,500 pesos for a tour. And for kids, seeing a towering giraffe silhouetted against tropical palm trees and bamboo is a surreal, unforgettable highlight.
Let's quickly touch on health infrastructure and petty scams. If things go wrong, Coron District Hospital can handle the basic triage, stitching up reef cuts, treating severe dehydration, dispensing antibiotics for minor infections. But for any serious physical trauma or complex medical emergency, you require a specialized medical evacuation. You either need a chopper to Puerto Princesa, which is a 1-hour flight south, or a jet straight to the massive hospitals in Manila.
Which means comprehensive travel insurance with explicit high-limit medical evacuation cover is absolutely non-negotiable. Do not step on the plane without it, and airlift will bankrupt you. As for petty scams, they are thankfully rare, but be aware of tricycle gouging. As we noted, a standard ride within the town limit should be 10 to 30 pesos. Do not accept the 100 pesos they might initially quote a confused tourist holding luggage. Also, watch out for fake environmental fee collectors standing at random remote beach sites. The legitimate government environmental fee is 100 pesos, and it is paid exactly once, usually at the pier or during your initial tour registration, not piecemeal to guys in flip-flops at every single lagoon.
All right, we have looked at the spreadsheets, we have reviewed the safety guidelines, the historical context, and the logistics traps. Now let's talk about what it actually feels like. Because nobody travels halfway across the world just to execute a perfect budget spreadsheet. What are the emotional peaks? What are the moments that just floor you? And what are the crushing letdowns? Start with the best moments.
The peaks in Coron are profoundly visceral. We described it earlier. But physically descending into Barracuda Lake and hitting that thermocline is a shock to your central nervous system. Imagine hovering in the water. Your head and shoulders are submerged in cool 28-degree water, but from your waist down, your legs are wrapped in a heavy thermal blanket of 38-degree heat. Your brain physically struggles to process the contradictory sensory input. It feels like magic.
And contrast that violent shock with the profound, echoing silence of Twin Lagoon. You swim through this incredibly narrow, jagged gap in the limestone rock. You actually have to time your swim with the ocean tide so you don't scrape your head on the ceiling. But once you pass through that dark threshold and enter the inner basin, the ambient crashing noise of the ocean vanishes completely. The water is glassy, the massive karst walls tower hundreds of feet above you, entirely enclosing the space. The acoustics change so dramatically you can hear yourself breathe. It feels sacred.
Then there is the terrestrial peak, the golden hour at Mount Tapias. Yes, climbing 724 concrete steps in the oppressive humidity is brutal. But when you finally reach the summit, the sweeping panoramic view of Coron Bay forces you to pause. Watching the sun dip behind the jagged islands, painting the sky and the water in these absurd saturated shades of gold, orange, and violet, it is an aesthetic triumph.
And of course, the history. Hovering over the Luzon gunboat. You don't need a heavy scuba tank. You are floating there, breathing through a plastic tube in just 3 meters of water, watching brightly colored clownfish darting in and out of a rusted, encrusted anti-aircraft gun mount. The stark juxtaposition of violent, mechanical history and vibrant, reclaiming nature is stunning.
We promised a brutally honest deep dive, which means we must discuss the disappointments. Because if you arrive in Coron with the wrong expectations, this island will deeply frustrate you.
And the biggest, most immediate disappointment for many travelers is the aesthetic of Coron town itself. We have to be crystal clear about this. It is not a beautiful village. If you are expecting the charming, sandy beachfront promenades of El Nido or the pristine white sands of Boracay, you will be shocked. Coron town is dusty, it is loud, it is brutally functional. The waterfront is entirely dominated by a massive, concrete, working commercial, pier-loading cargo and diesel, not a strip of romantic cocktail bars.
There is also the painful reality of the cleanest lake claim. Kiangan Lake is breathtakingly, impossibly beautiful when it is empty. But if you fall into that 10 o'clock logistics trap we discussed, the magic evaporates instantly. Being surrounded by 150 tourists in bright orange life jackets, all shouting, kicking, and splashing, makes the cleanest lake in Asia feel more like a crowded, chaotic municipal swimming pool. The marketing claim feels incredibly hollow in that specific moment.
Another honest disappointment, particularly for the digital nomads and remote workers, is the Wi-Fi. We touched on it, but the frustration is deep and daily. You see people sitting in cafes, staring angrily at their screens, their blood pressure rising as a simple 2-megabyte email attachment fails to load for the 5th consecutive time. If your livelihood depends on video calls, Coron will actively hurt your career.
And finally, a harsh, necessary truth for the diving community. The marketing material heavily implies that anyone can just jump in and safely explore these incredible World War II wrecks like an underwater playground. But the reality of the deep wrecks, specifically the massive vessels like the Akitsushima and the Okikawa Maru, is severe. These are not casual, bright, sunny reef dives. They require advanced certifications for a reason. And if you choose to penetrate the hulls and swim through the engine rooms, you are entering pitch-black, highly confined spaces filled with 80 years of accumulated, highly volatile silt. One careless, accidental kick of a fin, the silt kicks up into the water column, and you are instantly in zero visibility conditions inside a jagged metal labyrinth. It is inherently dangerous, and it is not the bright, colorful, easy dive some casual tourists expect.
So, if those honest disappointments, the dusty, chaotic town, the heavy crowds at the lake, the terrible Wi-Fi, the intense, dangerous diving sound like absolute deal breakers for you, you need an alternative. You have your flights to the Philippines booked. Where else should you go instead?
If the lack of polish and the gritty town is the deal breaker, alternative one is the obvious, immediate comparison. El Nido, Palawan.
El Nido is the polished, highly curated cousin. It has a significantly wider, more sophisticated international restaurant scene. It actually has nightlife and beach bars. The Big Lagoon and Small Lagoon are, arguably, more purely photogenic and dramatic than anything in Coron. If you want aesthetic perfection, comfort, and a town that caters directly to Western tastes, El Nido wins effortlessly.
But you must explicitly acknowledge the steep financial premium you pay for that polish. As we calculated, mid-range rooms in El Nido start around 3,500 to 5,000 pesos compared to Coron's 2,200. The equivalent island-hopping boat tours jump from 1,200 in Coron to well over 2,000 in El Nido. El Nido is the right choice if you heavily prioritize dining, atmosphere, and ease, and are completely willing to pay a 40% premium for it.
Now, what if you are the opposite? What if you are a hardcore diver on a strict, unbreakable budget and you do not care about the topside scenery at all? You just want underwater value. Where do you go?
Alternative 2 is Malabol, located over on the island of Cebu. Malabol is the ultimate diver's budget alternative. You go there for the famous sardine run, literally swimming through massive swirling clouds of millions of silverfish just meters from the shore, and you go for the dramatic, deep coral drop-offs at Pescador Island. The accommodation is substantially cheaper than even Coron, with very solid, clean rooms running 800 to 2,000 pesos. The vibe is intensely laid back, devoid of luxury resorts, and purely focused on dive culture.
But the trade-off is massive. Moalbal completely lacks the majestic karst limestone lagoons. There are absolutely no World War II shipwrecks. The beaches are mediocre at best. The above-water scenery is perfectly pleasant, but it is entirely unremarkable compared to the dramatic, towering cliffs of Palawan. Choose Moalbal for pure, unadulterated underwater value. Choose Coron if you need the full, comprehensive package of dramatic scenery both above and below the waterline.
Which brings us to the fundamental promise of this episode. We've torn apart the budgets, the deep history, the logistics, the scams, and the geology. We have laid every single card on the table. It is time for the final matrix. We need to answer the question, is Coron actually worth it for you?
Let's do the final verdicts for each traveler profile. I want a definitive yes or no. Let's start with the backpacker. Is Coron worth the journey?
Yes, without a moment of hesitation. At 1,800 pesos, or 24 pounds a day, Coron remains one of Southeast Asia's most spectacular value propositions. You get wreck snorkeling included on standard cheap tours. The hostels are modern, air-conditioned and clean. The local paluto food is incredibly cheap and theatrical. And the landscape rivals luxury destinations that cost 3 times as much. Just book your trip in the shoulder season to avoid the Easter crowds, bring reef-safe sunscreen, and enjoy the math working perfectly in your favor.
What about the mid-range couple?
Yes. At 3,700 pesos, or 50 pounds a day per person, the value-to-experience ratio is exceptional. You get comfortable air-conditioned rooms with good mattresses, a brilliant mix of local seafood and decent tourist dining, and full-day island hopping that would cost double in El Nido and triple in places like Raja Ampat. The only caveat is that you must manage your luxury expectations regarding the town's gritty, concrete aesthetic.
And the family traveling with kids.
Yes, with conditions. The conditions are strict. Your children must be 6 years or older, and they must be highly comfortable sitting on loud, vibrating boats for 3 to 5 hours a day without complaining. If they are, the Callaway Safari and the shallow snorkeling are incredible memory-making experiences. But you must secure your infrastructure. Book West Town Resort early because family-appropriate accommodation with proper pools and hot water is extremely limited.
The luxury traveler.
Yes, with conditions. Properties like Club Paradise and Two Seasons delivered legitimate, world-class luxury and isolation at 15,000 to 25,000 pesos a night. That is a remarkable, undeniable value against Maldives or Bora Bora equivalents. The condition is the friction of getting there. You must be entirely willing to endure cramped prop plane flights, sweaty van rides past dry scrubland, and a bumpy boat transfer. The transit feels decidedly unluxurious, but if you could tolerate 3 hours of logistical friction, the 5 days of private island paradise payoff is enormous.
Finally, the digital nomad or long-term solo traveler.
Yes, with conditions. The cost of living is excellent at roughly £700 a month. The hostel community is strong, physical safety is exceptionally high, and the environment is deeply inspiring. But the hard condition is the infrastructure. The Wi-Fi is a genuine daily hazard. If your income relies on leading consistent Zoom calls or pushing large video files to clients on a deadline, Coron will actively hurt your career. Our advice: split your time. Do 2 weeks offline in Coron, then take a cheap flight to Puerto Princesa or Manila where the connectivity is stable and reliable to catch up on work.
As we wrap up this deep dive, there's one final provocative thought you need to chew on, something that builds on all these logistics but goes much deeper into the psychology of modern travel. We started by mentioning the new airport terminal, the aggressive doubling of flights, the international resorts breaking ground. When you visit Coron in 2026, you are visiting a destination teetering on the absolute edge of a massive, irreversible transformation.
It begs the question, are you experiencing the authentic Coron? Or, by constantly chasing these perfect budget spreadsheets and flocking to the cheapest hostels, are you actually part of the final massive wave of budget travelers that inevitably forces a working, gritty fishing town to gentrify into just another generic, polished luxury resort hub? Every single peso you spend there is casting a vote for what the island becomes next.
That is the honest verdict from Phil and H.